The content of this is being okay. Do you usually give a few minutes for people to?
Hold on, we're live, we're live, we're live. Okay, let's go back to meeting, guys. I'm here with you. That looks cool. Hello, everybody. Um, welcome to join me at the kitchen table, right? If we've not met, I'm Lorna Owens. I forgot I had this on. I am the CEO of Desert Sage Lifestyle Wellness Company. But when you join me at the kitchen table, you're in my house, right? And you will meet some of my friends, and we will talk about everything and anything. So as not to delay, I have my first guest. You know, you're my first guest on this new adventure called Join Me at the Kitchen Table,
Oh,
Dinkinish. Yeah. So I have Professor. We have Dinkinish O'Connor, and she was a professor at St. Thomas University in communication and so forth. But let me tell you a little bit about her because I'm just gonna like read it like so. Dinkinish O'Connor is an award-winning poet, writer, editor, and educator. With more than 25 years in publishing, her career has spanned both journalism and the literary arts. She's written for the New York Times, Bon Appetit, Ebony, the Miami Herald, the Miami Times, among other publications. Her Substack publication, which you guys got to get, is called Sipping Lovely, explores the complexity of grief and coping through tropical social issues. Beautiful and experimental with his language and storytelling style, Dinkinish uses memoir and essay to share what it means to be a Black woman, the daughter of immigrants, and a carrier. This I love this line, and let me tell you, Dinkinish writes very, very well. I think she has some friends and peeps that I'm going to let in, but I'm going to finish this first. It says, "A carrier of the ink, all being over 3 million years." So, Dinkinish, welcome to my kitchen table. And let me see who wants to come in to join us. Hi there, welcome. Thank you for joining. Oh, George, my goodness, George, this is special. George is we talked about George and reminds me of dear friend Nancy Ankrum. So
hi,
blessings to you, George.
George.
Love that. So, Dinkinish, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You said that you're a daughter of immigrants. Where your family from?
Yes. So I consider myself a Miami girl to the bone. And what I mean by that is Miami is such a special city because it is the amalgam of the sounds and the rhythms of so many countries of the world. And my mom raised me to appreciate that. Like that was such an integral part of my upbringing. And so, yeah, my mother and father were Jamaican immigrants. My
Right?
mother was from the misty mountains of Manchester. I'm the only person in Miami who is not from Kingston, guys.
No, 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 no. I am. I'm from Manchester. I went to
Oh, you
Manchester High
are?
School. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I forgot. Raise non-alcoholic wine to you.
Cheers. So,
Yes.
yeah, I love Miami for that. You know, it's this beautiful chaos, and it's going through a lot of aggressive changes. But yeah, that being said, I've been telling Miami stories since my career began in journalism. Technically, when I was living in New York, and so I am so proud to be from the city.
So, how did the writing career come about? I know you said journalism, and I do. So, what's the background there in terms of, do you have a formal education or not?
Yeah. So, gosh, God bless my mom. She was horrified by this idea of me pursuing a career as a writer. You know, in my culture, Jamaican culture, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you get this.
Yeah, there you
Um,
go.
and
There you go.
so she was horrified. So I was attending Howard University, and guys, I did something crazy. I dropped out and moved to New York, and I was very fortunate to be a part of a village. I was very
Forget about that.
fortunate to be a part of a village of storytellers in the fashion and hip hop culture. And so I was an intern at a magazine called XXL and another magazine called Honey, which was like the baby sister of Essence. And really,
Yes, I remember, honey.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I was a part of that team. And then this website called Media Bistro was offering a food and a wine boot camp.
No, 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 stop. I know Laurel Toby. I've slept at Laurel Toby's house.
Lauren Toby? Who's
Yes. She started Media Bistro.
Oh wow. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
and
one
she
of the
sold
first.
it.
I would tell her one of the, like one of the first when Media Bistro just started. This is like early 2000s. They used to offer these boot camp classes, and they had a food and wine writing boot camp class that was being taught by the senior editor of Food and Wine magazine. And let me tell you, when I hooked and crooked that $500 to get into that class. So, first of all, I had to get accepted into the class. So, once I got accepted into the class, there was all this like drama and offering and tithes giving so that I could be a part of this class. And literally it just went from there. I was in Wine Spectator. I was still in my 20s when I got my first byline in Wine Spectator. I got to interview Cassandra Wilson about her passion for wine, and Kenny G. I hope some of you know who these people are.
Yes, my people will know and your people will know, but then the rest of it is suspect.
And then it just went from there. I was very, very fortunate. When I moved back to Miami, I Kathy Martin was the food editor at
Yes.
the Miami Herald, and I sent her a pitch about exploring wine with Jamaican food with my Jamaican mother, who only drinks Manischewitz Grape Concord wine. Okay. No matter what I gave this woman, Sautern, you know, it was always, this don't taste like the Manischewitz. The Manischewitz is very high quality. So it just went from there. I was very fortunate because there wasn't a lot of Black women in the space. And actually, I am the first Black female wine writer in South Florida.
Must, because I tell you, I met you first I didn't know you exist, and the whole construct of a wine writer just didn't take whatever. And
Yeah.
then on top, you're saying you're pairing Jamaican food with wine. I'm like, ooh, this is really
Yeah.
interesting. I met you at the Jamaican Jerk Festival in
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale one year. I think that's the first time I met you.
Yes, we had a wine pavilion. And let me tell you, it did not go well because I was trying to proselytize this idea of pairing dry reds with spicy food. No, it didn't go over. Nope.
Oh,
They like to drink off dry Gewürztraminer and Chenin Blanc and honey wine. And that was such a costly lesson that I learned.
yep, we
Um,
learned, don't we? We
yeah.
learned.
But yeah, it's been I've been very blessed in this way. But like all artists, my career has transformed significantly after I became my mother's caregiver when she
Yeah.
was
So
when she,
let's transition into that because I know one of the things we talked about speaking about is the whole issue of grief. And a lot of people know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, starting with denial and hopefully ending up with acceptance, right? In between there, you have anger, you have depression, and so forth. And we talk about being brokenhearted by losing a loved one, but we now know that it's really a broken brain because grief significantly changes the brain chemistry, yeah, brain chemistry.
wow.
And a lot of times people end up relying on the primitive brain. And so just simple tasks and all like that, they can't figure it out. So love for you to share, walk back and start how that happened for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I read somewhere, I think it was in Joan Didion's book, which is so good, The Year of Magical Thinking.
Mm.
That was the first time I came in contact with any work that came close to how I was feeling about the loss of my mom. My mom and I were very, very close. And I think there's a line in the book that says, grief is a sadness with nowhere to go or nowhere to land.
Uh,
And, but over the years, that has evolved. Grief does land somewhere. It resides inside of you. And if you don't move it around, if you don't shake it, literally shake it around, um, it can lay inside of you almost like stones, almost like sediment accumulating inside of you. You know, in the practice of yoga, they say that your sacral chakra or your hips are the seat of emotion. And so, for example, a lot of the practices that I participate daily in have to do with releasing. Um, and I think what I really want to communicate in this space is that grief is very tactile and it's very visceral. And I know that there are a lot of academic articles and research that tell us how it should flow, but it's a very subjective and individual journey. And for anybody who's on this journey right now, I really want you to hear me. It's a very individual, personal journey. And so if it's not reading like the way your therapist or your minister or your spiritual advisor is saying it should, that is perfectly fine. And that's why I wanted to talk to Lorna and with you about the gift of storytelling on the grief journey.
And when you say storytelling, do you mean write it or just being able to communicate how you're feeling on, because I think that's like two different things. Because if you're speaking to someone, we have the tendency to tell you or make it seem like this too should pass, or we feel like we need to have a response rather than to sit, be in the moment and just let this, whatever this thing, wash over. And a lot of times we don't know if we're not going through it, we don't know what to do with it. So when you say storytelling, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So what it means is the story that is born from the grief. And so as a narrative artist, my chosen medium is writing. And so for example, I have an upcoming workshop that I'm doing that focuses on writing, but in this season of like social media, storytelling takes on many forms. It might be podcasting, you know, even a post. I don't know if you all notice this. Like you may be reading a comment on a post and somebody has released their entire self in this short little post. You know, so I think that the way that we experience storytelling has evolved significantly over the years. So to be clear, it's all the ways that we experience story. So through the spoken word, I believe you can experience story in your body in various forms of movement, and also in the written word.
So if you were doing a class, for example, that has to do with storytelling, expressing your grief, what would it look like and how would that unfold?
Yeah, so you know, and this is so just a little background about me. So have been teaching in communication, English, and humanities for many years. I've designed classes around the role of storytelling and the dehumanization of women and girls, right? I've been teaching that the role that documentary storytelling specifically plays in sharing these global stories about the dehumanization of women and girls. So this is what I've been doing for a while. And so I say that to say, you know, when you're in my class, you know, it's visceral, you're moving. It's not just about the traditional read this and do a summary. I don't do that because I don't think that does anything. Um, in the upcoming workshop that I'm teaching, there is a segment called The Connection Between the Senses and the Story. How do you stimulate the connection between the senses and the story? And I'll give you a specific example of what I mean. So when my mom died, I just intuitively started to light candles that night. So my mom died the first day of summer, early in the morning. And the world, Zora Neale Hurston says it the best. Mama died at sundown and changed the world. Like, of all the literary references to death that I've read, and trust me, I've read a lot, there's just something about that phrase. And I relate so like in such a real way to that phrase. So my mom died in the morning. And so that night, and then so my dad, who had been with my mother he had been with her for 60 years, but they were married for 46 years, roughly. So he's like inconsolable. He's completely checked out, in his world. And so I'm like navigating him and then myself. And I just intuitively started to light candles. And I look back at that like, wow, it was I still do it every single night as we speak. There's a candle burning in the room. And I look at that like, wow, that was such an organic response to this metamorphosis that had taken place. And
Let me ask you, were you expecting her possibly to go, and did she die at home? And does that experience make any difference?
yeah, wow. So yes, I knew she was gonna die. My mom had so the oncologist really didn't know. It was either endometrial or ovarian cancer. Um, and I knew because I brought my mom home. Like my mother was a nurse and an educator herself. So we had a conversation at length about what she wanted, right? When she got to the point where she couldn't advocate for herself. And so my goal was to make her as comfortable as possible. So I brought her home. And it was the most excruciating and the most beautiful moment of my life because it was a gift to be in that moment. And I don't know any other way to say this. As an artist, I felt like I had been handed something incredible. I don't think I thought that in the moment, but
Right.
I started to write my memoir and I reflect on these like key moments, like that moment in the Christian faith that I was raised in, we call it giving up the ghost. So when she gave up her ghost, to have been there, to have seen it, to have witnessed it, to have smelled it, to have heard it, I think that was when I started to weave the connection between the senses and the story. And so it's an important point, right? Because I think in your grief journey, because of what Lorna said earlier, there's a collision of emotions. But I think what has been universal in my conversations with other grieving people over the years is that grief is gluttonous. It wants, it
It's like you can't give it enough. It's like feeding the beast, and there's never enough, right?
Yeah, it really is. And when I say gluttonous, I don't want to limit that to food. It could be sex. I have a friend who um had multiple sexual partners after the loss of her brother and her lover. They died within a close proximity of each other. And yeah, that was her outlet. And just like even needing to be like for some people, for me, I needed a lot of aloneness. Yeah, like I could say I think I was gluttonous in that way. Like I really wanted my space. And
Was it
I'm a,
depression or you just needed your space?
hmm?
Was it depression or you needed your space? Or that was, you just
It might
needed,
have been. It might have been. I think that, so when we talk about grief, everyone, I think that depending on your upbringing, the tradition, the culture, and even religion, you have this idea. For many of us, for me, growing up, I want to be clear, Jamaican, Christian, both Pentecostal and Catholic. I know. It's like, what, really? Um, you're taught that death strips you down. It's a form of suffering. And that in that stripping down, it leaves room, it makes you malleable enough for God to really connect with you and form you into who you're really supposed to be. And so it's recommended for you to serve more at your lowest point. So that's what I did. I mean, I was volunteering all over the place. I almost adopted a child. Um, like I was doing the most because that's what I was told. That's how I was raised. But what I realized that in that momentum of doing, I was masking the visceral, raw emotions that I had about this devastating moment in my life. And those raw emotions started to kind of unearth later on. So, in other words, these tools, these cultural references, these religious ceremony, like these things that you're taught to do, yes, they can help, but nothing in the world is going to ever mask those raw, visceral emotions brooding inside of you that need a space to land. And I think that the page can be an ideal place for that to land.
when you write about it, someone might fear that you're revisiting the pain and it's raw and it's right there. And so your thought is you still write, you still push through it no matter what.
So I have a series of rituals. So I for everyone who is grieving, I highly recommend creating ceremony for like ceremonial practices for yourselves. So, for example, when I make ginger tea in the morning, it's a ceremonial moment. It's a part of my meditation. Um, when I do my yoga practice, same thing. You you have to have an outlet of some kind. You have to. And so for me, I think that when I started my grief journey, I feel like I didn't start grieving until I went to Italy, right? Because I had so much to manage. I had
How
my
long after, just how long after your mom passed? And
4 years,
I'm sorry,
4 years.
4 years. And it was 4 years later you went to
That
Italy?
was the first time, yeah, I had allowed myself because I had my dad. I was taking care of my dad who was like gone. And I had promised her, that I would take care of him. So I had him, and then my brothers. I'm the only girl in my family. I don't know if anybody else is the only girl in their family, but it's a lot. So I was managing a lot of things, and so I think the gift of that was that I didn't. It's almost like I didn't have room to deal with myself. But then I had convinced my graduate advisor to let me take this class in Italy that had nothing to do with my nothing to do with my major. But I told her, I was like, I need this. I need to get out. I need a minute. And when I got to Italy, I found out that another professor, she had just lost her mom. And so we were, grieving together in Fuji, Italy. We were walking over this bridge, and I remember just like us holding hands, and it was the first time I had allowed myself to feel the breadth and the depth and the width and the height of my pain.
Mm, that's interesting. That is interesting. And having done that, did you feel some release when you got back to the United States? And is that why you make reference to that as a point of import?
I didn't, you know, when I got back, it was like thrown back into all the drama, probate, this, all that.
Gotcha.
Um, but having that, and this is my point to everybody else, you know, for example, the workshop that I'm teaching, it's not about letting go, it's about releasing,
What's the
right?
difference? What's the difference?
Is like with letting go, it's this, there's a finality to that. And in my opinion, grief can last your entire life. And how you can manage that is to deliberately participate in practices to release it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is
So
there one practice more capable of getting you there than others, or each person comes to grief with their own set of rituals, their own practices? Find one that works for you and see how it goes.
yeah, I mean, and also be willing to understand that it might not be one. You know, it might be several different things, like several different practices that you have to participate in to figure out what is giving you the most relief. And that relief may not last. You
Mhm,
you may
mhm.
have to, this is why, you know, they say grief has stages. And this is why I said earlier, grief is gluttonous. You know, my grief is still gluttonous, but I think over time you find ways to manage that. And one of the ways that I have found is through writing. I mean, it took forever for me to write this memoir. And I think it was because I was in my head about the formalities of grief. You know,
Yeah,
and all of the books that I was reading, like Edwidge Danticat, you know, Joan Didion, like I have, you know, Toni, like I have so much respect for these writers and I'm reading their work, but that's not, the work wasn't coming out in this orderly, linear way. It was coming out loud and voracious and angry and, you know, noises and sounds and smell. And I kept trying to suppress that. You know, it was like, well, but over time, I was like, I just recently found out that a chapter from the book is being published in a literary journal. And it's a huge deal for me because
right.
the chapter is not, um, the chapter is not this happened and this happened and this happened. It's very,
Okay. All right. So we'll certainly get Dinkinish back.
I'm
Dinkinish,
not.
let me just say, I'm glad you're back. Let me just say this. I don't know. I know George is on. And George, if you want to share something, then you can certainly open your mic. I just wanted to take the opportunity to do that. It doesn't matter. You're here and I know your journey. So if you want to, then certainly this will be a good time. Go ahead, Dinkinish.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was in my head about this is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like, this is what, once I let that go and I realized that this literary journal by the name of Midnight and Indigo, when I realized that they were going to publish this, I was like, oh my God. You know, I went to my literary agent, like one of the chapters are, you know, I was so excited because I know my literary agent's looking at me like, girl, when are you going to? But, you know, unless you're on this grief journey, you don't get it. You don't understand. Like, it can really, I was feeling insecure in ways that I had never felt insecure before. So, you know, it was like navigating those insecurities.
But that's the whole thing about the brain, that the insecurities that you'd feel, it's because you're now operating on your primitive brain. It's a primitive brain of you that's taking over some of life's processes. So where you would never felt insecure, you're like, what is this all about? Yeah, that's it.
There you go. Yeah, that was the first time I had heard anything like that. What I know just on a human level was like, suddenly I just felt like vulnerable. Like when it came to writing, I was always pretty confident, but then suddenly I was like, I had made the decision to release this story out of my body onto the page. And it was like, ooh, I don't know, are people going to get it, and then to realize that people are getting it and do connect with it, it was just so, I just feel seen.
Yeah. Yes. Well, listen, obviously, we could there has to be a part two when the book comes out, or have you with us at our literary jazz brunch when the book comes out. Um, Parting words. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, if they wanted to take your workshops, are you open for traveling for workshop? What exactly? Because I think everybody knows somebody, and it's a journey we all take at some time or other, which is I often say to friends when they suffer a loss, I am loaning you my sympathy, because we we all we all unfortunately have to experience that. So I know people would want to connect with you, and so how would that look like?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to communicate is that in my workshops, grief is not just limited to death. I think that specifically in this time that we're living in, as a collective community, we're grieving decency, we're grieving civility. Some of us may be grieving our very democracy, right? And so,
Or
grief,
job loss,
right?
a
Grieving
loss of a
of a
relationship. Yeah,
relationship.
yeah.
I just want to be clear that it's not just limited to death. And so, coming up on March 25th, Tuesday, March 25th, and Wednesday, March 26th, I'm hosting a grief writing workshop. And in that workshop, we'll be exploring some of the things that we discussed today. How do we connect our senses to the story? How do we release? And I'm excited about it because I know so many people um, it, feeling like they don't know what to do with it. And my intention is in this workshop to invite you to trust your visceral responses and consider that you could release this story out of your body so it can end up on the page. So that's coming up March 26th and 27th. I'll share the link with Lorna. So
Sure, share the link with me. And I know that you have something Substack. I
yeah,
subscribe to that. So
please support guys, and not just myself. We're living in a critical season when it comes to knowledge and information. It's a critical season, so you need your writers and storytellers more than ever before. So, and a lot of us don't have the financial dignity that we deserve, so I encourage you to please support Sipping Lovely.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And get a paid subscription.
Yes, yes. And I enjoy, Dinkinish writes amazingly well. Her writing has stayed in my head for years and years, and I keep saying, I want to read more, I want to read more. And the only way to be able to read more is to get that subscription, which ends up in my inbox, and I can always go to Substack and read it. But Dinkinish, my love, peace and blessings. It's not easy. It's really not easy.
No.
And I didn't know when I reached out to you, this was the journey we were going to take.
Yeah.
It was the journey we were supposed to
Yeah.
take. And yes, I there's really nothing more to say than to thank you, George. Thank you for sharing this time with us. And you all join us next at the kitchen table where I will be speaking to someone with amazing stuff. So peace and blessings,
Peace
guys.
and blessings. Thank you, everyone. Bye, George.
Good and good
Bones.
night.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.